majority of my life, cancer didn't have much of an impact. I had a friend in Girl Scouts whose mom had breast cancer, but she beat it. My grandpa had cancer as well, but he beat it. Everyone I knew who had been diagnosed with cancer had been okay, so I never really thought of it as too horrible of a thing. When I was 12 years old, my stepdad was diagnosed with colon cancer. All my previous experiences with cancer had ended happily with a cure or remission, so I wasn't scared. He had a surgery which removed part of his colon, and sure, the surgery slowed him down a bit during recovery, but he returned to his normal self quickly after. Chemotherapy never really seemed to slow him down either, at least in my 12-year-old eyes. He and my mom had just had my little sister only 2 months prior to his diagnosis, so there was never a doubt that he wouldn't be okay. He had to be okay. A year and a half after his diagnosis, the doctors found a spot on his liver. The cancer had metastasized and he underwent surgery in December to remove them. I was 13 and my world revolved around myself, as it often does when you're in middle school. It didn't affect me too much because it was Joe and he was going to be okay. There had been no complications during the surgery, but he had some complications with his recovery, and it took longer than expected. This was our first big scare, and we were told that he wouldn't be released until after Christmas. On Christmas Day, however, we got a miracle. It snowed. But even greater was that Joe was released from the hospital and he got to celebrate with us. And this gift just kept on giving. Post-op scans a couple of months later showed no more lesions on his liver and he was pronounced to be in remission. Roughly a year after remission was announced, some spots showed up on his liver, but the doctors reassured us that it was just scar tissue. This is the part of my story that begins to go downhill quickly. It was November, about a year and a half of remission later, and he wasn't feeling his best. He was extremely bloated and decided it was time to go get it checked out. I went with him to the ER and we waited for a while until my mom got there too. They checked him out and discovered his bloating was a result of fluid buildup in his peritoneum. They drained the fluid and did a CT scan. Cancer, stage 4B, terminal. To say this was a shock would be an understatement, as we had gotten those exact same spots checked out by his oncologist just months before, and they'd assured us that the cancer wasn't back. He and my mom traveled to multiple hospitals, Johns Hopkins and Sloan Kettering being their top choices, and consulted specialists in his particular type. Colon cancer with mets to the liver, peritoneum, which is the abdominal wall, and lymph nodes. The doctors said that they were looking into clinical trials, so we stuck with the chemotherapy until one came about. And one did, an experimental trial geared towards his exact type of cancer that they said could potentially be curative. The surgery would be very taxing as they would coat his abdominal wall with chemotherapy, and it would require a very long recovery. But they used the word curative, so obviously there was no other choice for Joe. He wanted to see his daughter go to kindergarten, his stepson to middle school, and me to college. So the obvious answer was yes. It was March of 2014, and they decided he was a perfect candidate. About a week before the surgery, he went through pre-op tests to make sure that he was still a good candidate. I remember this vividly because I was sitting on my phone in my rather boring personal finance class as I got a text from my mom saying, ascites are back. They said he can't do the surgery anymore. I remember dropping my phone, shocked. It was 5 minutes until lunch, and I couldn't wait anymore. I ran to the bathroom and cried. This surgery was kind of like the last straw, our last chance at a cure. From here on out, it was chemotherapy for life. They tried all sorts of different chemos, but the chemotherapy only got worse. He would get it every 2 weeks, and so we'd have 2 good weeks a month and 2 bad weeks. But we made the most of those weeks. We took Disney trips, lake trips, beach trips, and a trip to tour his alma mater, Virginia Tech. We got into a routine which made chemotherapy kind of seem like a normal thing. It was just another part of our lives. And for the most part, he stayed pretty stable. It wasn't until August of 2015, 2 weeks before I was to start college at his favorite place, that he found himself back in the ER. A pulmonary embolism, which led to the discovery that the cancer had spread to his lungs. Blood thinners for life. The whole for life thing sounds pretty daunting, like it's blood thinners for years, but here, years weren't an option anymore. While I was at school, he had a bowel obstruction that luckily fixed itself since he was no longer an operable patient. They changed his chemo, hoping it would stabilize him. And even with these scary events, everyone stayed positive. It wasn't until New Year's Eve, as my mom and I were looking for outfits to wear for the night in her closet, that I realized things were worse. I will never forget my mom looking me in the face and saying, "I think Joe's dying." Through this entire experience, my mom had been so strong. She's the strongest woman I know, one who's been through 2 divorces, and now her soulmate is dying of cancer. This struck me hard and it made saying goodbye as I packed up to go back to school for a sorority recruitment nearly impossible. For those of you who have gone through recruitment, you know how taxing it is and that you rarely get any time to yourself. I'd update my mom every night and she'd send back encouraging words. Little did I know she was at Johns Hopkins with my stepdad the entire time. She FaceTimed me before bid day and let the cat out of the bag, another bowel obstruction. It had been a couple of days, but the doctors were hopeful that it would correct itself again. It didn't. High up there on the worst days of my life is January 23rd of 2016. I was walking out of English class in McBride and noticed I had missed calls from my mom. I called her back and she told me, 3 weeks. The doctors were giving Joe 3 weeks to live. The bowel obstruction wasn't going to fix itself and there was nothing they could do. He would be on hospice until he eventually starved to death due to not being able to digest anything. I went home a week later thinking I would be walking into sadness and that Joe would be in horrible shape. He wasn't in good shape as his weight loss was quite noticeable, but if there's one thing to know about him, it's that his illness has never stopped him. There was something wrong with the sink, so he asked me to take him to Lowe's. We got the hardware he needed and got back in the car, where he then asked me to take him to Hallmark. I was confused, but I took him anyway. We walked into Hallmark and he went straight for the cards. He picked one out and asked me my thoughts. It was a graduation card for my 7-year-old sister. He proceeded to ask me to pick out a Sweet 16 card for both her and Liam, a graduation card for Liam as well, and 10 more birthday cards for Annie to get her to 18. This is by far one of the hardest things I've done in my entire life. The next morning, I walked downstairs to find he and Annie making beignets, their favorite Sunday morning activity, which Annie still sometimes does. We exchanged goodbyes and shed lots of tears, not knowing if this would be the last time I get to see him, not knowing if this would be the goodbye. The next weekend was Valentine's Day, and I got the chance to go home and see him again. Again, he lost at least 15 to 20 more pounds and looked as though he'd aged 20 years. He and my mom decided to renew their wedding vows that day. It was beautiful. Once again, I said goodbye, thinking for sure that this would be the last goodbye. We were almost at 3 weeks. 2 weeks later, it was spring break, and not having a car made it impossible for me to go home during those 2 weeks, so we stuck to FaceTimes. Joe was still alive 5 weeks after his 3-week sentence. I had made plans with my friends in October for spring break and wanted to back out, but he told me I couldn't. He told me I'd be mad if I didn't go. So I went, and I often regret it. The first couple of days were really fun, and then on our last night, my mom texted me that Joe was really starting to slow down, and that I should call him and say goodbye. I called him, and he told me he wasn't going anywhere. I made my way home the next day and received a couple of hurry-up texts from my mom because he was refusing to take his medicine until he got to see me. I finally made it home to find him in bed. He had lost a lot more weight, and his movements and reactions were very slow, but he still had his wicked sense of humor. We talked for about a half hour, and then he took his meds and went to bed. This was his last good day. Over the next few days, he was in and out of consciousness. He would only get out of bed to go to the bathroom, although he could hardly walk as he was down to about 100 pounds at this time, 6 feet tall and 100 pounds. I saw a lot of things that I wish I hadn't, and a lot of things that made me, for the first time in my life, genuinely wish for someone to die. His suffering was excruciating to watch. A 47-year-old man was having his 80-year-old father change his diapers and his wife force medicine down his throat. My little sister and brother refused to go into his room during his last few days. My mom's birthday was March 13th, and we threw her a little party. We had a cake, and she blew out her candles and made her wish. Her wish came true the next morning. During Joe's last few days, we had watch shifts where we would sit next to him and make sure that he didn't try to get up or didn't eat anything. My last shift ended at 3 a.m. on March 14th. I woke up at 9 a.m. to my mom walking into my room with tears streaming down her face. He had just passed away, and that was her birthday wish. She had wished for him to be set free from the cancer and from the pain. The hospice nurse came about 30 minutes later and declared his death. My mom called my sister and brother's schools and asked me to go pick them up. Liam was 11 at the time, and so the second I walked into the office, he asked, "Joe died, didn't he?" I said yes, and we walked to the car. I dropped him off at home, and then I went to pick up Annie. Annie, in case you couldn't tell based off the beignets, is the biggest daddy's girl I've ever met in my life. They were 2 peas in a pod and so similar it was frustrating sometimes. And here I was going to pick her up so she could find out that her dad was dead. I walked into the school and she came walking down the hall towards the office with her guidance counselor, who my mom had called prior to me picking her up. She had a box in her hand and it was covered in characters from Rio, she and Joe's favorite movie. I asked her what it was and she said, "It's my daddy memory box," with a huge smile on her face. When we got home, my mom and I sat her on the steps and we told her that her dad was dead. Shortly after getting home, the morgue people arrived. They carried him out with ease as he only weighed about 85 pounds. 30 minutes later, a guy came and removed the hospital bed and all the medicine from the house, and it was like it never happened. Later that evening, I got to open a letter which was entitled, "Open Only After Joe's Passing." I thought it would make me cry, but instead it made me smile and even laugh a bit. He was the most amazing man I've ever met. He was loving, caring, intelligent, witty, funny, and he was the last puzzle piece we needed to complete our family. Roughly a month after his passing, I found myself here on the drill field. I had never heard of Relay for Life before I came to Virginia Tech, and I never knew just how much of an impact it would have on me. When you're in college, you talk to your parents less and less, and being away from them begins to feel normal. My stepdad was never a big texter. We'd chat once a month at most. So not hearing from him or seeing him for a month didn't seem weird. I'd found myself a little bit in denial of his death. It felt like I could go home and he'd still be there. So here I was, walking around the drill field as night fell in search of his luminaria. It had yet to be lit once I found it, but nearby was an event leader who also happened to be one of my new sorority sisters, Andrea Everett, who introduced me. She had a lighter and she lit my stepdad's luminaria. It read, "In loving memory of Joe Towkin." This was the big moment for me. It was the moment when it hit me that he was really gone, and I broke down. Thankfully, she was there as a shoulder to cry on, and has been ever since. Really for Life means a lot of things to me. It serves as a way for me to continue my stepdad's fight. It has led me to meet hundreds of people who are just as passionate as I am about fighting this disease, and it played and continues to play a major role in my recovery. So here I am, relaying so that other families do not have to be missing their most important puzzle piece. So the parents don't watch their children die before them, so the wives don't watch their husbands die, and so that no one has to tell a child that they have lost a parent.